Coleman reporting. The time is 8:10. An increase in income tax, inheritance tax, fuel and alcohol duty, a cut in the budgets of the NHS, schools and defence. All of that is what the Chancellor says could happen in the event of a vote to leave the European Union next week. Appearing alongside his Labour predecessor Alistair Darling, George Osborne will say today that both spending cuts and tax rises would be required to fill a £30 billion hole in the public finances. He assumes he'd be in office to put those into a post-Brexit budget. There's just one problem. 57 Conservative MPs have said this morning they won't have it. His position would be untenable. And given the government's small majority, he ignores their threat at his peril. The Chancellor's with us now in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can we first be clear on the status of this document? It is a campaign document from Remain, nothing more.
Well, for the first time today, you have a Conservative and Labour Chancellor agreeing on the scale of the decisions needed to fix the public finances if we quit the EU. There would have to be increases in tax. There would have to be cuts in public spending to fill the black hole. And we've got the markets warning us now what will happen if we quit. You've got the experts spelling out the consequences. And today you've got a Conservative and Labour Chancellor spelling out what that means for people's lives and the taxes they pay. And it would be self-imposed austerity for many years to come. And we've just, to make my point, years, we've been dealing with the consequences of the last recession. Why would we want to impose a recession on ourselves in just over a week's time?
But when you say this would have to happen, and you write in the Times today, there would be a permanent deterioration in public finances. How do you know? This is something, no country has ever left the European Union, let alone this is the first time that Britain would potentially do that. So how can you possibly know what would definitely happen?
Well, first of all, you have the weight of expert opinion. So you've got the Institute of Fiscal Studies saying there would be a £20 to £40 billion deterioration in the public finances. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says a more than £40 billion deterioration in the public finances.
Yes, and then secondly, all models are based on what's happened in the past, haven't they? They use all that kind of data, and that's just not possible in this scenario.
Well, first of all, you've got some of the world's leading independent think tanks, external bodies, and you've got the markets. Listen to what your programme is telling listeners today. You've got Rolls-Royce, one of our biggest companies, issuing a warning to its staff about the consequences of quitting the EU. You've got one of our largest property developers, Berkeley Homes, saying that there has been a sharp fall in the number of people looking for new houses at the moment because of fears about the EU. These are real-world things happening now.
And as far as the things that are happening to Britain are concerned, economically, at the beginning of this year, we already weren't doing as well as we were at the end of last year. The rate of growth of the British economy was weaker in the first quarter of this year compared to the end of 2015. So it suits you at this moment to say that is because of the fears of Brexit. But this was already a weak economy before all of this became a real prospect.
Well, actually, we're one of the fastest growing economies in the West, and we've had a record number of people in work.
We are growing less than we were at the end of last year. There was, there was a problem at the Western issue that you didn't anticipate last year.
If you're telling me that the country faces all sorts of economic challenges, yes, it does. Look, all these Western democracies face this challenge of how you have sustainable and productive growth in the coming years. But I can tell you one thing. Cutting off your links with your closest trading allies, self-imposing on yourself a recession is not the answer to any of those problems. And in the end, it's just common sense. Look, there are lots of people listening to this show who either work or run their own business. And lots of people and lots of businesses are at the moment delaying decisions because of the uncertainty of what would happen if Britain quit the EU. And you even have those today who want to leave the EU saying it will take many years, 4 years, and they're being optimistic about fixing the new arrangements. That is 4 years of delayed activity, less economic activity happening in the country. And that's how the country funds its public services. So we either have to get more money in by raising taxes like income tax, or you have to spend less on the big public services like the health service or the education system or the defence budget.
And you are raising things which not only did you vow in your Conservative manifesto last year that you would not do, by talking about an increase in income tax, you would be breaking your own tax lock legislation.
Well, when we fought the general election, we had an economic plan, and we've got an economic plan that is delivering that prosperity and the jobs and the like.
You also had a plan for a referendum, so you should have weighed all of that up together.
The point is the country does not have a plan if we quit the EU. We'd wake up in just over a week's time with no economic plan for our country, with financial instability, with years of uncertainty. And, you have to cut your cloth accordingly. The country would not be able to afford the size of the public services we have at the moment, and we would have to increase taxes. Now, that is the reality of a country that is not just immediately poorer because of the uncertainty in the financial markets and the like, but for decades ahead will be doing less trade with its key partners, its key allies, and indeed the rest of the world, because a lot of our trade deals actually depend on our membership of the EU. That's common sense. If you're trading less, if there's a lot of uncertainty, there's less money coming into the exchequer, and therefore there has to be less money going out.
The problem with everything that you're saying and that you're focusing on the economy is that perhaps it's possible voters won't believe what you're saying, or they might be thinking, this is about the long-term future of our country. This is not about whether we're better or worse off. It's about the kind of country they want. And immigration is a big part of why some feel like this. Is there anything further that the government might be able to offer in terms of freedom of movement?
Well, I'll come on to that in a moment, but let me address this point. It's all very well for people who are wealthy to say, well, I don't mind if we're going to have a recession for a few years. I don't mind if jobs are going to be lost. I don't care what's going to happen to the living standards of millions of people. But I do care what happens to those people. Brexit might be for the very richest.
I didn't say people were saying that. I'm asking you to address voter concerns on immigration, and some of them are amongst the lowest paid and the least well off in our society.
I'm just addressing this point that somehow there's economic chaos is a price worth paying. I'm saying that Brexit might be for the very richest in our country, but it is the people on lower middle incomes who will be affected. It's the people with job insecurity who will lose their job. They are the people who will pay the price for this enormous leap in the dark. And by the way, when we walk through that door next Thursday, there is no coming back. We're not going to be rejoining the European Union in years to come when we think we've made a mistake. It will be a one-way exit. And that is going to live with us for decades to come.
Now,
on immigration,
yes. Okay. It's a specific question that I want to know. Is that the Guardian is reporting this morning that Downing Street is considering whether there could be anything more to offer in terms of perhaps controls on freedom of movement that would reassure voters who are worried about the open door to this country for EU citizens. Is there?
Well, the short answer is no, because we have a plan, and the plan is to restrict the welfare that people get when they come to this country, so you don't get out until you put in. And that is the plan we will implement with the agreement of our partners. And it is part of a multi-pronged attack to dealing with people's concerns about immigration, controlling it from outside the EU, dealing with abuses of free movement. Also, crucially, seeing the European economies now growing, actually, at roughly the same rate as the British economy.
Are you therefore comfortable with EU
I think all of those things will help address.
Are you comfortable with net migration
concerns
from the EU being 184,000 last year?
Well, no, because we want to have it reduced to the tens of thousands.
Right. How will you do that?
Well, I've set out you need to control immigration from outside the EU.
No, I'm not.
Well,
I'm
that's
not
crucial.
Talking about outside the EU. I'm
that is
talking
very important
migration.
because over half of our migration comes from outside the EU. So
I asked
you've got to address that.
About migration from the EU.
Yeah.
You said you are not comfortable with the level it is at the moment. How are you going to address it, and what will you bring it down to?
Well, first of all, we will address it by dealing with the abuse of free movement, dealing with the concern the British public have that people come here to claim welfare, the very big attraction that our big welfare payments have offered to people. And second, by making sure that the European economies grow. And in the most recent quarter of economic activity, actually the Eurozone economies were growing faster than the American economy or indeed the British economy. So, we've had this extraordinary period for the last couple of years where the British economy has done well. The Eurozone has been, of course, weak. That's created its problems. Now those problems are being resolved. And again, on the basis of a couple of years of difficulty in the Eurozone economies, to choose to leave the EU permanently, I think would be a massive mistake. And you don't, in the end, deal with people's perfectly legitimate concerns about immigration by wrecking your economy, putting people out of work, cutting their incomes. These are not the right answers to a perfectly
you have
legitimate
set
concern
out
people
today
have.
what you as Chancellor would do in a post-Brexit budget. The problem is that 57 of your own MPs are saying they would simply vote against all of this because it would be a punishment for those who voted for Brexit and because it would renege on so many of your manifesto pledges.
Well, you first of all have this unusual situation. I was checking on the way here when the Today programme was first broadcast. I think it was in 1957. I doubt since 1957 you've had a situation where a Conservative and a Labour Chancellor both agree on the scale of measures.
I can see why you want to talk about that, but that is not the question. No, answer this question. How are you going to pass a budget on the lines of what you've involved, £15 billion of spending cuts, the same amount of tax rises, when 57 of your own MPs would vote against it?
Well, I'm pointing out that the kind of measures we'd have to take are ones that any Chancellor and any government would have to take.
How would you pass these measures?
Well, Conservative MPs, of course, don't like raising taxes. I'm a Conservative who wants to, by the way, go on reducing taxes. My plan is to reduce taxes, to increase investment in the NHS.
You couldn't pass this budget,
if we remain in the...
Because if 57 of your MPs vote against it, Labour's not going to vote for spending cuts.
If we quit... Well, you have actually Alistair Darling warning today that we would have to cut spending.
Labour has said that they will not vote for this.
Let's be clear. No Conservative wants to raise taxes, least of all me. But equally, Conservatives understand, and indeed, I suspect many Labour politicians understand, that you cannot have chaos in your public finances. You have to deal with the hole that would emerge if we quit the EU, and we would have to take the necessary measures. By the way, when I first became the Chancellor, Conservative MPs very reluctantly voted for an increase in VAT to fix a hole in the public finances.
This is completely different. You have chaos in your party and you are outlining something that it would be absolutely impossible for you to get through the House of Commons.
The Conservative government would do what was needed to deal with huge instability in our economy and, of course, the chaos in the public finances. Would it be easy for folk who pay their taxes, for the public services? Of course not. But we would have imposed this on our country. And there is an alternative. If we vote to remain in the EU next week, then we're going to be stronger, safer, better off. We'll be going on building that economy, creating jobs. Businesses will be out there working hard to grow our economy. That's what we want to see. That's on offer. Let's vote for the positive upside, not for all the consequences.
For people who will vote in the opposite direction, you are trying to scare them, whether they are voters, whether they're in your party. I mean, this is a classic case of Project Fear, isn't it? Apocalyptic £30 billion hole in the public finances.
This is what every independent expert in the world is telling us. And just look with the people voting with their own money. They're not British people. They're investors in Britain. All around the world, sterling is falling. Money is coming out of our stock market. You've got big companies like Rolls-Royce warning their workforce. You've got big property developers saying people aren't buying homes. You've got small businesses worried about their future. Now, this isn't warnings just from a Conservative Chancellor. This is real money out there in the real world. And this is the irreversible decision we face next Thursday. If we walk through that door, we quit the EU, taxes will go up, public spending will be cut, and we'll be living with the consequences for years to come.
George Osborne, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the time is now 23 minutes past 8.
Well, listening to the Chancellor is Ross Hawkins, our correspondent, who's in Cheshire this morning. And Ross, you were talking to voters earlier this morning. I think they're with you again, and they've been listening to what the Chancellor said. Convinced?
Well, they were listening. They were listening to him referring to them, what they would make of it. One of the most dramatic mornings, I think, in the referendum so far. Now, there are 3 voters, different views, but they all insist they've got an open mind. Let's start with Jess Green, who's 21 years old, works in this bookshop and coffee shop I'm in here in Nantwich. You say a lot of your friends, your young friends, are basically pro-leave. Having listened quite closely to the Chancellor there, do you think he'll change their minds, to your opinion?
No.
And why not?
I think to make those claims isn't the greatest. He can't back them up. As he said, was it 57 MPs have said that they wouldn't put that through? Labour won't vote for it. I think to make those claims and make more scaremongering, it's not going to turn change people's opinions to stay in. It's not going to work that way.
But he's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's talking about the independent judgments of the IFS, a think tank, and he's talking about self-imposed austerity for years, potentially. Does that just bounce off people?
I don't think it'll ever bounce off people, no. I think it'll certainly sit in the back of their minds. I mean, it's not going to... What his claims that he's making, I don't think that's not my reason to want to stay in. I don't think they will ever be allowed to cut the NHS budget. They won't ever be allowed to raise taxes by that much because he won't be able to put the budget through. It won't go through. There's no way.
Ron Gilchrist, a committed leaver, and you are concerned about sovereignty and immigration. The Chancellor addressed your concerns directly. He says you don't deal with those worries on immigration by wrecking the economy and putting people out of work. What's your reaction to that?
Well, amazement, really. I mean, it wasn't a reply, really, as it never is when you ask a question to a politician. They never do reply, do they? They ask you another question or divert you some other way. I don't know I don't know how to reply to that, really.
But would you take an economic hit for your concerns about sovereignty and immigration to be addressed? Would you just say, look, that's worth it, as George Osborne suggested there, that some people might?
Well, yes, I think I would. Yes.
So you are willing to...
A straight answer to that, yes, I think I would.
Your straight answer to that question of leave as a leaver is, yes, I think it'll hurt the economy, but yes, I think it's worth it.
That's correct, yes, that's exactly what I would like to feel, yes.
Let's talk to one of the most important people in a way, Steve Lawson, who runs the bookshop here, completely undecided on this. Having listened to that, are you any closer to a conclusion about how you're actually going to vote?
Not really. At first, when the comment was made that we're looking at a recession again, having just come through one from 2009, that got me really scared and worried. But we got through it, and I suppose leaving the EU is a bit like a divorce. It's never easy, but maybe in the long run things are better. So.
But you've just been telling me after 2009 you had to keep this place we're open in now open 7 days a week just to make sure that you could pay the mortgage, pay the bills. Does that not give you a moment to pause what the Chancellor has to say?
It did, yeah. It was scary right off what he said. But we did get through last time. Things are better now than they were in 2009. So we would be better prepared for such a situation.
Jess and Ron and Steve, thank you very much. All with decisions to make. And of course, none of the politicians, given any of these interviews, can have any real idea as to just how much this detail the public are listening to and how much they believe on either side.
Ross Hawkins, thank you very much. And on that note, if you want answers to some of these questions that that have been raised with competing claims from either side, a very good source is the BBC's website Reality Check, so go there.